I want to begin by asking a question. Why are we silent? Why are we silent when just 58% of our African American and Latino students graduate from high school, while 86% of our white students graduate from high school? Why are we silent? Why are we silent when just 15% of our African American and Latino students graduate from high school ready for college level work, and nearly 50% of our white students do? Why are we silent when a majority of the most affluent students go on to graduate from college with 4-year degrees, but only 10% of our lowest income students do? I want us to ponder that question. Why are we silent? As we come together today to celebrate an idea that is fundamental to the American project, that is fundamental to everything we stand for, that is present in our founding documents and in our laws and in our hearts, is an idea that inspired Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Martin Luther King, and Rosa Parks. It is an idea that inspired exceptional people like Jackie Robinson and Thurgood Marshall, and the astronaut Mae Jemison, Justice Sotomayor, and President Barack Obama to break through barriers and do things that people of color had never done before in the United States. This idea gave strength and courage to so many facing grave threats from ignorance and hatred. This idea led people to put their lives on the line because it was so powerful and inspiring. This idea is equality. Equality is central to our identity as Americans. It's made our country a place where people of every race and religion and background could maximize their talents and contribute. It's America at its best, and all of us, in one way or another, have benefited from America's commitment to equality. All of us in this room have had doors open to us, and we have seized the opportunity to walk through those doors. But for all its power as an idea, equality remains elusive for far too many people of color in New York and across the country. None of us can fully escape the seeping sense of unfairness that conflicts with the fundamental values of America. Almost every person of color has felt the sting of discrimination at some point in his or her life. We've all developed ways to cope with it. Sometimes we ignore it. Sometimes we confront it in emotional ways. But sometimes, inspired by generations of freedom fighters, we get organized and we can change things for the better. That's what happened 63 years ago when Oliver Brown, a humble welder and local church leader in Topeka, Kansas, filed a lawsuit so that his third-grade daughter, Linda, could attend an all-white school just 7 blocks from their home rather than an all-black school that was more than a mile away. Oliver Brown just wanted equality for his daughter and his family. He just wanted to see the promise of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution fulfilled for his daughter and his family. And when Brown versus Board of Education finally got to the Supreme Court, all 9 justices in 1954 agreed with Oliver Brown. They agreed that segregation was wrong. They agreed that equality must be at the center of the American project, that education is the path to equality. It's worth noting that in that decision in Brown, one of the key elements in that ruling was a study on children's perception of themselves and of race that was done by Kenneth Clark, the first African American to serve on the state's Board of Regents. In that decision in Brown, the Supreme Court made clear that for all the injustices in the world, some of which we have power to overcome, some of which are difficult to correct, there's one institution that is different, one place where the promise of equality should and actually can come to pass every day, and that is the school. Schools have been called the great equalizer, the place where the impact of the differences of economic class and background can be erased, and where qualities of intellect, creativity, hard work, and perseverance can triumph. That's what they said 60 years ago, and they challenged us to make real that promise of equality. And for 60 years, Americans have tried to make that happen. We passed federal laws to provide more resources to low-income schools. We passed state laws to increase funding for our schools. We passed policies to strengthen the teaching profession and to integrate our educator workforce. And those of us who've chosen a life in education have chosen it because we believe in that dream of equality. For me, I became a teacher because that dream was made real for me by teachers that I had. I became a teacher because a teacher saved my life. When I was 8, in October of my 4th grade year, my mom passed away. I was in Mr. Osterweil's class at PS 276 in Canarsie. And Mr. Osterweil didn't look at me and see an African-American Latino boy with no hope or no future because of the challenges outside of home. Instead, he believed in me. And he created a classroom environment that was inspiring and challenging every day. I can remember like yesterday, reading the New York Times every day in Mr. Osterweil's class, performing in Midsummer Night's Dream and Alice in Wonderland. He was there with a book every time you finished. He was there with a new challenge every time you completed an assignment. His classroom was full of love, it was full of care, and it was full of opportunity to find joy in learning. It's because of Mr. Osterweil that I'm alive today. It's because of Mr. Osterweil that I became a teacher. It's because of Mr. Osterweil that I do this work, because I believe what he did for me in that classroom at PS 276, we can do for all children if we are committed to this principle of equality. But we also must acknowledge that we have a long distance to travel. I mentioned the disparity in graduation rates and college completion rates. We also know that whether you look at national tests or state tests, the percentage of students, African American Latino students, who perform at grade level is half the percentage for white students, half. And believe it or not, as Assemblyman Camara said, we remain 60 years after Brown, the most segregated state, not just racially, but economically. Not only do our district lines for our 700 districts often track patterns of residential segregation, we know that there are districts today in New York whose attendance policies, enrollment policies, attendance zones actually foster segregation by class. There are places where you can look, including New York City, where blocks away students are separated by economic status. Schools that serve mostly wealthy students, blocks away from schools that serve mostly high-need students. And we know that that segregation breeds inequality. The facts are plain. America spends less on the education of our poor students. America spends less on ensuring that our poor students have access to preschool. Poor students are often assigned to less effective teachers and have fewer resources in their schools. Fewer after-school programs, fewer social and emotional supports. And if they are high-achieving students, often they have less access to the kinds of rigorous courses that will allow them to succeed in college admissions, and they are less likely to go to top-notch colleges. By every single measure, whether it's classroom grades or test scores or high school and college graduation rates, our children of poverty and our children of color are further behind, and the promise of equality, the promise inherent in Brown, still eludes us. We always hoped that somehow society's stubborn injustices would be denied entry to the classroom. The classroom was supposed to be sacred, a protected haven where children would be given the tools to succeed in equal measure. We all put faith in our schools to help solve society's toughest problems, from poverty and joblessness to crime and social breakdown. And with each decade in America, we've made an effort to get closer to that goal of equality. And we've become more bold and more creative and more determined. The nation required states and districts to prove with a common assessment that all kids are meeting standards, and to publish data by race and by income and other factors so that we can have an accurate picture of student performance. We created charter schools, some of which are defying the odds and outperforming some of our wealthiest schools in the state. while serving high-need students. In 2010, here in New York, we committed to require schools to meet high standards that prepare all children for success in college, careers, and life. We committed to pass laws, and we did pass them, that would ensure that we would have an honest picture of performance in our schools and the performance of our educators, and that we would act when schools are struggling or our educators are struggling. Administrators, unions, school boards, and elected officials all signed agreements in support of higher standards for teaching and learning. And today, there is even more that we can do, concrete steps to move closer to the vision of Brown. With the Board of Regents and the legislature, we can invest in magnet secondary schools that attract students across district lines and create opportunities for students of different socioeconomic classes to go to school together. With the support of the Board of Regents and the legislature, we can focus on our English language learners, invest resources in their success, invest in bilingual education, and finally pass the New York State DREAM Act so that our undocumented students have the opportunity to go on to college. We can, in the tradition of Arthur Eve, Assemblyman Arthur Eve, we can invest in opportunity programs in higher education, opportunity programs that we know work, that allow more students on our SUNY, CUNY, and independent campuses with support to graduate. Students who are often first-generation college students, but with the right supports, they can succeed, and we know they're succeeding in those opportunity programs. We can together reevaluate our school funding formulas. As Assemblyman Kamara said, we've got to make sure that we are investing resources in a way that is equitable, that ensures that students in our highest need districts have access to the full range of opportunities. And we need to continue to invest in early learning. This year's important investments in universal pre-K are a huge step forward, and we've got to build on that investment. And we've got to be willing to take on the tough challenge of district lines and asking, are there opportunities for students to cross district lines for educational opportunity? And we've got to take on the tough challenge of school boundaries and enrollment policies. And to the extent that those boundaries and enrollment policies foster segregation, they must be reversed and replaced with policies that foster socioeconomic integration. We can do all of these things, but none of it will pay off if we fail to teach to high standards and if we fail to hold ourselves accountable. And lately, there has been a troubling backlash to these foundational policies. You've seen it in the media and in the political arena. You've seen it in schools and communities across the state where some parents, some educators, some union leaders, and some politicians have said the standards are too high. They argue that we should not hold ourselves accountable for student learning. Now, I fully appreciate how difficult change can be. And like all new initiatives, our policies are imperfect and will need continuous reflection and improvement. And I know that the transition to new and higher standards has not gone smoothly everywhere. But it's also an exaggeration to say that there's too much pressure on the system. The fact is, as of today, 4 full years after New York State adopted higher standards, not a single teacher or principal has been replaced under the new evaluation law. And few, if any, will face consequences for at least another year. And even then, it will be a small percentage. The evaluation law is not a gotcha system. It is a vehicle for fostering continuous improvement. And we've invested over $500 million in Race to the Top funds to ensure that there's the opportunity for continuous improvement through professional development. Teachers, administrators, and districts have been given time to get this right and will continue to have more time and more support in the years ahead. As we continue to move forward and improve, let's also remember why we set high standards and why we have assessments and accountability in the first place. We do it for one reason, our children, and the reality that for them, education is the best path to success in the 21st century. This is especially true for our low-income students of color, who often have only one slim little chance of making it in this world. That slim little chance is education. They don't have inherited wealth. They don't have connections. They have education, school. That's it. And if we don't hold ourselves accountable, and if we don't demand transparency around student growth, and if we don't challenge ourselves to give our kids the very best education possible, children of color, our low-income children, will be the first to lose. The adults won't lose. The people who defend the status quo won't lose. Only the children will lose. They'll go through 10 or 12 years of schooling barely learning to read, struggling with math. And some, we've all seen this, some will cover up their low self-image by acting out, by bullying, by abusing substances, or just withdrawing completely. Eventually, many of them just drop out and plunge off of a cliff into dead-end jobs, into prison, or early graves. Tens of thousands of New York children make those decisions every year, and disproportionately, those children look like Linda Brown. I respect those voices who argue for thoughtful adjustments. I look for constructive insights from my critics. I listen patiently, even when the attacks become personal. But too many of the voices attacking the Common Core have done so with false narratives about the motives and intentions of education reform. This isn't about privatization. This isn't about a federal curriculum. This isn't about enriching testing companies. This is about taking responsibility for the education of every single child, no matter his or her race, background, or economic status. What those who resist higher standards are really saying is that some kids just aren't going to make it, and that's acceptable. It's not. It's not acceptable. It violates everything that America stands for. It's an assault on the values of America, a country based on the notion of equality of opportunity. It's also, in the end, short-sighted because society bears the cost of a permanent underclass, underprepared for the 21st century economy. Worse yet, by retreating from accountability and allowing children at risk to slip through the cracks, advocates of lower standards deny us the talents of all Americans, talents that are desperately needed to keep America strong and growing in this new century. If they succeed in their destructive goal of crippling the landmark advancement of 45 states coming together around college and career-ready expectations for all students, it will be a setback to the cause of greater equality in our schools, and that would be a disgrace. And 60 years after Brown, we should not be able to point to schools in a single neighborhood where one school serves mostly poor students and achieves painfully discouraging results, and another school blocks away serves mostly affluent students and puts them on the path to success. That kind of segregation, that is a disgrace. So I ask you today, why are we silent? Why do we accept these unequal outcomes? Why do we allow Brown versus Board of Education to be a dream deferred? It does not have to be this way. In over 70 visits to schools since September, I've been in classrooms that are making a difference, that are making it different for kids. It's in a classroom in Rochester where students were learning to see math not merely as a set of rules to memorize, but as a set of tools to solve real-world problems because of the Common Core. It's in a classroom in Harlem, sitting with elementary school students talking about the evidence in Watson's Go to Birmingham and Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry for common themes between those two powerful texts because of the Common Core. And visited schools where 30-year veterans have described how the Common Core has helped their children achieve at levels they didn't think were even possible. This is no time to buy into those false voices that say we don't need accountability and we don't need proof that all kids are learning. To them, I say, don't just tell us they're learning, show us they are learning. Now is the time for all of us, people of every race and background, to come together and realize the promise of Brown. Realize the promise of equality. And remember the promise we have made to our children. We brought them into this world and promised to protect and provide for them, to give them the opportunity to grow with safety, to enable them to seek their passion, to inspire their curiosity, and to find their place in the world. We all want better for all of our children. That's what Oliver Brown wanted for his daughter, Linda. And that's what all of us want for our sons and daughters. And until we have that equality of educational opportunity for every student, we cannot be silent. We cannot stand by while inequality persists. We cannot ignore the staggering differences in educational outcomes among our children of different races and different backgrounds. That's not America. We are ultimately one people, one society, and one nation. And when we raise our voices together in pursuit of our common values, we can produce a sound that is greater than all those voices of fear, defeat, and retreat. These are all our children. This is our responsibility, and we will not be silent. Thank you.